teenagers are going through really similar things right now because everything's crazy.
Hello. Welcome, everybody, to Kids Are Talking. My name is Michael, and we are ready for an awesome show today. We have some amazing guests. We're going to be talking about drugs and in the COVID era. And I'm here with Dr. Don, and we have a lot of exciting things to talk about today. Everybody that's watching, if you have comments, please add them into the chat. We'll try to address them. And everybody have a great time and have a good conversation. Don, are you ready for the show?
We are. It's a very historic day in the state of Connecticut, and it's July 4th is coming up. So we're going to celebrate and acknowledge both those holidays tonight. The first one we're going to acknowledge is that today weed became legal in the state of Connecticut. And we thought it'd be good to time the show right around that. And July 4th is also an important holiday because America has been through COVID and it's still going through what I call no man's land, which means that we are struggling to find out who we are and what our identity is and where are teens going now? Where are we going to go? I think we're just very confused in our no man's land world as to who we want to be and where we're going. And I want to mention a continuation from last week's show, the LGBTQ society, the organization, the Trevor Project, which is the most important and leading organization for suicide prevention and crisis intervention. The phone number is 1-866-488-7386. The Trevor Project is important because a big part of tonight's show is we're going to look at the mental health status of this country right now. And all of you who watched our show last week on modern identity and sexuality, there is a tremendous uptake now in terms of mental illness and suicide and stress and anxiety and depression going on in the youth of our country, not just in the LGBTQT community, although I think we should also know that Carl Nassib, who we talked about last week, who, by the way, is the football player who came out, first active football player to come out being gay, donated $100,000 to the Trevor Project. So we're very, very happy to recommend it's a 24-hour site for people if they need help, because one of the problems that's happening in this country right now, and this will be a backdrop to our show tonight, is that if you want to see a therapist right now, it's really hard to get into an office. They're so busy. There is no room for people to get help. The hospitals, emergency rooms, and we're talking about kids that are 13 years and younger, are not able to get the help they need. So one of the things I just want to put out tonight as we get into this show is the importance of mental health and how we really need to all get behind the reality that no one's talking about there are a lot of kids right now that are really suffering and struggling, and we need to all start paying attention to that. And Mike, I think you have another.
Well, yeah, I mean, today we're talking about drugs, and I think it's important to mention the partnership to end addiction, drugfree.org. The numbers on the screen, 855-378-4373. So if anyone's having problems with addiction, there's always help, whether it's for suicide or for, to help get over this. If your therapist is booked or you need help, I mean, that there's plenty of resources out there for everybody. And it's important that people don't feel isolated or neglected, no matter what their issues are.
America needs to wake up. Mike, here we are, like today, weed gets legalized. God, I remember when I was a kid, it was the 1960s. My father ever caught me, and he did catch me once smoking pot in my house. I was busted, and he was ready to call the kids and tell the parents to flush the pot down the toilet. And here we are now. It's 2021 and 2022. We're heading into all kinds of new age, new America, and COVID, and we've never gone through a pandemic like this before. So it's amazing that we're having a show like this tonight, right? To be talking about these kinds of things. I mean, that's just incredible.
Well, listen, we're live streaming on Facebook, on Twitch, on YouTube. We had actually a lot of kids that wanted to be on the show, but out of fear of their parents didn't want them on the show, or high school kids that said, I'm going to be applying to colleges, and I don't want that image of me out there talking about these things. They didn't feel like they could be honest because of the candid nature of being live streaming. So we do have two brave individuals that are on the show to talk about this today, and we should commend them. And hopefully the kids that couldn't make it maybe can come back another time and speak.
Well,
about it.
Stephanie's trying to get on. Just so you all know, we have another person that's supposed to come on tonight, but she's having trouble with her technology, so she might crash the party later. We'll see. One other COVID paradox and irony that's going on here is, for those of you who are reading the paper, it's very interesting now that teenagers who have parents that don't want their kids vaccinated are doing it behind their parents' back. And isn't it ironic that we're talking tonight about drugs and substance abuse, where for so long kids, which was considered unhealthy, didn't want to tell their parents what was going on. And now we have kids who want to get vaccinated. And boy, kids right now, we have a problem because kids need to get vaccinated. And they're doing it behind their parents' backs, who are people that these parents don't want their kids vaccinated. Mike, isn't that unbelievable? So that's an interesting paradox.
The whole anti-vax thing as a whole, I think that's a whole nother topic. We should get into in a different issue. I think that's a totally different type of drug than what we're talking about tonight.
Right.
So are you ready to?
I think we're ready.
Welcome our guests.
I think we are. Yeah. Let's meet our guests. I guess let's meet Leighton. Let's bring Leighton up first.
Hi.
Leighton, hey, good to have you, boy.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be on the show.
We need you because, as usual, we're still trying to learn and don't know a lot. And you are one of our experienced experts that have you've been there and back. And actually, the way we're going to start with you is that once upon a time, marijuana was the word, and now it's cannabis and it's weed. And I think there's some history that maybe people would be interested in hearing about where this all started with the word marijuana, which doesn't seem to be used anymore.
Yeah, so back in like 1910, 1920, there was a lot of Mexican immigration into our country. And, during that time, we didn't necessarily have, the same values and structure we have now. There was still a lot of racism present in our country and in the government. So in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, one of the top people was pretty xenophobic. So he kind of started this not anti-Mexican campaign, but anti-reefer, anti-weed, cannabis, whatever you want to call it. And they named it marijuana, or they started using that term for it because they were trying to push this propaganda image of it being, crazy reefer madness. And if you actually look back, you can find some on YouTube. There are the old commercials they made, and they basically idolize it as this crazy substance. It's going to make you go mad, superhuman strength. You're going to tear down your walls. So he connected it with the term marijuana because it sounded Mexican. And, the reason they made it a Schedule I substance back when Nixon was president was so they could arrest a lot of these, non-white people that have been immigrating into our country. So, it was originally called cannabis. It's still being called cannabis. There are thousands of names, but marijuana isn't really the best one.
All right. So as always, I'm struggling with language on this show because, this is a new world for Dr. Don and us, other people from this generation and other generations. So people like you help us out, even with the language. Every week I've been getting in trouble with it. So it's good for you to give us a little bit of that history. What do you think about today, July 1st? And legalized?
Crazy because I remember a few years ago it was happening in Colorado. They made millions of dollars off taxes, and then when I saw that, I said it's we just gotta wait, because as you've seen, when anything starts to make money, it spreads pretty quick. So I'm not too surprised. I think it's pretty cool though. It's about time that people are getting, the people who were convicted for it, they're getting let free. So that's amazing. So I think it's really good that it's happening.
Well, it's good to have you on tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to be asking you a lot of questions.
Sure.
We're going to meet your friend here, your new friend on the show. And here you are. Hello, Hailey.
Hi.
Welcome to Kids Are Talking.
It's so good to be here.
And what do you think tonight is about? You know, what's happening in our country. It's July 4th. It's July 1st. Post-COVID, no man's land. What do you think about where we're going now and this subject tonight?
Yeah, it's an important question. I mean, the word unprecedented is so overused when we talk about where we are culturally and as a nation, but it really is just the best way to describe it. We're really at a time where people are being asked to look at themselves, even in quarantine. So one of the things I've been sitting with is like drugs in the COVID era. Like, what is the relationship to substances and drugs in this very unprecedented time? And it's like there's been all of this spaciousness and quiet and unprecedented levels of tension compared to what we've known in the past. And what that really asks us to do is to go inwards in a way that we aren't really taught about in the culture, how to be with ourselves in the deep way that is being asked of us in this moment of in time. And so I think it's a really important conversation talking about drugs and substance abuse and substance use and the choice to participate and why we're making those choices.
So what is the driving force for, I mean, we had alcohol, we had prohibition, now we have, you know, mushrooms, stuffing cookies and edibles and LSD, vaping, e-cigarettes. What's the driving force? I'll ask you, Hailey, and then I'm going to get to you, Leighton, and I'll ask you the same question. What is the driving inside ride? I wrote a book with my dad called The Inside Ride, by the way. So for all of you who don't know what the inside ride is, you just said it really well, Hailey. It's like people are turning inward and taking a journey within themselves and trying to figure out in this crazy time we're living in who we're going to be, where we're going, and we're all a little bit lost. So what is the driving force that makes people want to get high? And they've always wanted to get high, but now they probably really want to get high.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things. In the past, we've talked a lot about peer pressure. We've talked a lot about fitting in, being cool. And I think now what we're really looking at is that, truthfully, I mean, I'm a very spiritual person. I teach about spirituality. And I think we're at a spiritual turning point. Culturally, a lot of people are waking up, even just Leighton sharing about like the history of the word marijuana and where that is coming from. We're waking up in a variety of ways. And one of those ways is spiritually. What that asks us to do is to turn inward, which is wildly uncomfortable. Many of us don't have the tools. We believe that hard feelings are wrong and bad. And we've demonized a lot of these really challenging experiences that are really actually quite normal in humanity to ask hard questions. And a very easy way to avoid that is to just go for a distraction. We have so many ways to distract ourselves. I mean, food, TV, media, money, spending, and another huge way is getting high.
So Leighton, what do you think? I mean, you've been involved in this culture for a long time. It's been a very important part. Thank you, Hailey. You've been involved in this culture for a very long time. What do you think for teenagers?
Well, I mean, as Hailey said, it's a variety of things, but I want to specify one of the things I really liked that she said was how, you know, people see these deep, dark feelings that, as she said, are demonized in our culture. And, you know, they turn to drugs to kind of suppress those feelings or in a way forget or deal with. They basically use it as a tool. And as Hailey said, a lot of people don't have those tools to look inward and deal with their feelings and better themselves. You know, even you stated that a lot of kids don't have access to therapy or to that counselor or whatever. So they're not really learning those tools. They're not being taught those tools in school. So they see someone in the bathroom, what are you doing? Oh, I'm getting high. Why are you getting high? It's nice. It's fun. Like, feels good. And they're like, okay. And it kind of creates this cycle because marijuana, weed in our culture, it has been begun to be more accepted. And we've seen that, you know, with the legalization, especially. So people don't see it as something that's harmful. And honestly, when you compare it to other drugs, you could claim that it's not, right? If we're looking at alcohol, you know, cocaine, meth, whatever, it's not that harmful, right? But to a developing teenager, it can create a vicious cycle that I'm sure we'll get into more later. But I definitely say the one of the driving factors is trying to like just deal with emotions.
Yeah. So for a young developing teenager, Hailey and Leighton too, I mean, what do we, you know, particularly, I told you right now, mental health for kids 13 and under in this country is we're in an epidemic. It's really bad. The epidemic has now created no place for these kids to turn. And so is this for a developing young teenager or pre-teenager now with the legalization of marijuana or weed, whatever we want to call it? How is that? Is that a dangerous slope now for these kids to be experimenting?
Well, I think what I want to say, and just to piggyback of what Leighton began to say, is that when I was a teenager, I had always heard people say like marijuana is addictive. It's an addictive substance. And I was always like, eye roll. It's not, compared to some of these harder drugs where you have physical withdrawals, you'll get sick, your body actually has a physical reaction to not taking the substance. And as I got older and I began to learn more about embodiment, emotional health, and not just physical sobriety, but real like emotional sobriety, I began to understand why people call marijuana and weed addictive, which is that it's actually emotionally addictive, meaning that it becomes an addiction to turn toward drugs, whatever that might be, and truthfully, a variety of other things. So I mentioned TV, food, there's 1,000 ways to have addictions. But in this case, substances, to turn towards substances as a way to avoid feeling your feelings. And then you never actually develop the muscle to learn how to be with yourself. And it's not actually something that you can outrun.
Absolutely. And what is the most dangerous part of this weed culture now? I mean, what is the scariest, most dangerous part of this new weed culture, Leighton?
I mean, I have to say this is a new thing. So it's good to talk about on the show because I'm sure a lot of of our older generation doesn't know about it, but there are these things called cartridges. Yes. And they basically have the THC, which is the psychoactive chemical, and it's extracted from the weed plant. There's various different ways. And they put it in like a little glass tube, and you attach it to some type of heating device that's called a battery. And it heats it up, produces vapor that you inhale, blow out, and it's like smoking weed, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem with these things, there's multiple problems. The first one is the accessibility. You used to have to go roll a joint, go outside, smoke it, spray the perfume, wash your hands, brush your teeth, all that, right? And then you got to, get all that. Now you can be sitting in the movie theater or wherever you are and hit your vape that's filled with weed, and then, blow it out. It still has a cloud, but it's not smoke. There's no flame. It doesn't smell like insanely as, weed does. So it provides us accessibility, and especially in the teenager's house where their mom is downstairs. They can't say, oh, I'm going on a walk, things like that. They can just sit in their bedroom, don't even have to really blow it out the window. And that creates that gives them more accessibility, and it makes it easier to get in that dangerous cycle we're talking about.
So and
then the second problem that comes with this is, since weed's not legal, or I guess it is legal now, but there are a lot of underage people buying weed. So there are carts, but they're not verified by the government or FDA or anything like that. There's no verification. It's illegal drugs. So, people are making them off the street and putting whatever they want in. And so that's the really scary part. I'm not sure if you know about this, but you probably saw in the news in the last few months or year that, people were going to the hospital and dying off of, these THC carts because they were filling them with something called vitamin E acetate, and it causes damage to the lungs. And the whole problem is, there have been fentanyl found in these carts, among other things, because drug dealers are filling it up with what they want and then selling them to kids. And, a kid isn't really, or a teenager isn't really caring too much, is this like the real cart? Because, sometimes they're indistinguishable. Sometimes people don't care. Real ones are very expensive. They're not even legal here, so you have to go out of state, etc. And so not only are they too accessible and too easy to use, but they also, a lot of times in the legal states or states where, weed was just legalized, contain really dangerous other chemicals and substances.
So what do we do about this?
Well,
you live in this culture.
The legalization of weed will definitely, hopefully have a good impact on it. But, there's not that much to be done except education, because, even with the vaping culture right now, once it started, once they are already hooked, you could say to an extent, especially with nicotine and stuff, there's not much you can do except educate and provide the resources they need But yeah.
What's the difference in vaping and nicotine? Can you help us?
That's a really good question. So, as you guys know, of course, nicotine's addictive, as we talked about, physically addictive, and then weed is mentally addictive. So, they both have their, cons, their separate cons. But the problem with nicotine is that it's definitely more addictive than weed because it's physically addicting. And they marketed these vapes. I know you may know there's many lawsuits. The main company,
the company Juul right now has a $40 million lawsuit against
it. Because they're claiming they marketed the teens. And if you look around, they did. They got a bunch of generations, hooked on vaping again. There were all these teenagers, even 13 to 30 that are now vaping. And the difference between it is that, it's actually physically addicting. So you get hooked faster. And, it doesn't make you high. So it's not, people don't consider it, like a drug, I remember when it first came out, there were people that were doing it and someone got into an argument with me claiming that it wasn't a drug. And, because you're not getting high. You're not like really feeling anything. And I'd say it's even scarier than what's going on with weed right now.
So are you both familiar with Tyler Skaggs, who was a pitcher? A young up and coming pitcher for the Angels in California.
I am not.
So there's a big suit going on now against this baseball team that the people working for the Angels were basically oxycodone and alcohol. It killed him, and there's the danger of painkillers, oxycodone, alcohol, and now this professional. This was a very young, promising baseball player, and now it's the Angels. They're being sued.
Yeah.
For giving him oxycodone and alcohol. What do you think about that, Hailey?
I don't understand. Why did they give those to him?
Oh, because I think, I assume, Leighton, they were basically thinking it was going to help him out and enhance his performance. Am I right?
Probably, mostly. Yeah, definitely the oxycodone, yeah.
And he's dead. He found him in a hotel room. So that's the danger, right? We what do we do? I mean, and now you get these kids lost in COVID, and where are we going, man? Right?
I think what's sad about this story with the pitcher is that he agreed to take them. And that's what I'm thinking. Like, as I'm hearing you speak, I'm thinking a lot about sovereignty and like, what does it mean to be a powerful being who gets to make your own choices? And like, the thing that I encourage of everyone, and it's my own personal practice, is like remembering that I have choice and asking myself why I'm making the choices that I'm making. And am I making them from a place of being deeply connected to myself? So I think I'm curious. Was in being willing to take these substances, and if there was something inside of him that was like, this isn't right for me, but I feel like I have to, or I should, or they say it's right, but it's not hitting the thing in here. So that's what I think is sad about this story.
I totally agree. A really sad story, don't you think, Leighton? I mean, it's
definitely, yeah.
And what about in the schools? You're going to be a senior, right, this year?
Yep.
What's going on in those bathrooms?
What's
going on in those high school bathrooms?
I mean, that's what's really crazy, and especially, again, to describe to the older generation. You walk into a bathroom now, and I'm sure back when smoking was more accepted, you still had to go outside, out to the smoking area in your school, and this is way back when you were allowed to do that.
You've never heard the song "Smoking in the Boys' Room"?
Oh, smoking.
No, I have, but it's not. Now I walk in and, you have nine kids hitting like the e-cigarettes, the vapes with nicotine. There are other people hitting carts in the bathroom. And, schools can police it to an extent. Obviously, people are getting searched. People are getting in trouble. And there's two problems with that is because, first of all, searching someone and getting them in trouble isn't going to do anything, especially if they're addicted to nicotine. You can't just search a kid, take their nicotine and say, okay, you have a detention for 3 days. While it may help the school, right? They're getting one less Juul out of someone's pocket. That kid is 99% chance they're going with their friends somewhere next day buying a new one. We need to provide rehabilitation, if that makes sense, because
Hey, Don, before we go too deep in this, I just wanted to say we'd be remiss if we didn't just say thank you to our sponsors for Kids Are Talking. I just wanted to mention that Kids Are Talking is sponsored by M&D Properties at Compass. So you can visit weknowwestport.com for all your real estate needs in Westport, Weston, Fairfield, and Wilton, and also Paradigm Financial Partners.
Kids Are Talking is sponsored by Paradigm Financial Partners. Align your values and financial goals. Build your wealth and financial security for a rich and satisfying life with Paradigm Financial Partners.
So, Leighton, back to what we were talking about. What do we do with this problem now? And both Hailey, you'll address this too in terms of what do parents do, what kind of rehab do we do, and how we prevent younger kids getting into this. What do we do about this problem? And now with COVID and the stress and anxiety and depression of these kids being isolated and not knowing what's to come, what do we do?
Well, first off, to start with vaping, because vaping is separate. It's important to remember that vaping nicotine is separate from vaping weed. Although they're consumed the same way, one, is a drug that's psychoactive, while the other is, nicotine, what's in cigarettes. So they're very different. With nicotine, I think, and we're doing it, but there needs to be a little bit more effort to educate children, because the people who are on it, that's a whole different story. The people who are already vaping, they're already inhaling nicotine. Once it gets in your brain, it literally changes the way you think. You will trick yourself into thinking a different way. And there's all this psychology behind it. And then it's mixed with, an addictive chemical. But for the kids who aren't addicted yet, the younger generations, it's important to focus on education, because we learned a lot about cigarettes when I was growing up. I remember in health, all of the bad facts, all the videos. And I think that's pretty effective. It's, they were claiming how they got a few generations off cigarettes. But the whole problem with vapes is that, these companies trying to make billions of dollars with billions of dollars advertised it and kind of snuck it in. So I think they have to vamp up the education, elementary, middle school about vaping, and then provide resources at school for those kids who are vaping. Because I've heard, some schools have a counselor, they have a box you can throw your stuff in, but there needs to be a little bit more effort in accepting that people are doing it and trying to help them and not get them in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, Hailey, from what I understand, and it's one of my frustrations, when I was a social work student, we actually had a group work program at Hastings High School where we had groups. I don't know if there's much therapy going on in the schools, or what do you think about what Leighton is saying?
Well, what I'm thinking about is people say this all the time. It's have open conversations. And on the surface, that's sort of what we say and what parents subscribe to. And then what actually usually happens is that people are afraid. Parents are scared. Parents turn to control instead of actually staying open enough to let their child make their own decisions. And I think that there's a lot of fear and a lot of punishment around any kind of substances, from vaping to nicotine to smoking weed to harder drugs. I was on TikTok the other day, and this celebrity, I don't remember who, she was talking about how the way that her mother got her to not smoke weed was by telling her and her sister that in their family, they have a rare genetic thing where if they smoke weed, they'll get violent diarrhea almost immediately. Wow. And that was there. And the thing is, it worked, right? They were we're not smoking weed when we go to parties. That's not what we're doing. And it works, but it works until it doesn't, until they're oh, this is actually not true. And so it's fear and punishment and control are not actually a good way to steer kids away from substances. The way to actually do it is to stay open, and not just the indoctrination of talking about staying open, but really holding the very uncomfortable pose, speaking to parents of actually staying open and being curious and receptive to what's actually happening with your child. I think it's also really easy to be open, but then there's really a right and wrong answer, and your child gets punished, or there's withdrawal if they say the wrong thing, or if they're doing the thing that you don't agree with. And so it really is an advanced pose to stay open. And I think that's what's needed, so we can have honest conversations.
Thank you. That's so, Leighton, that really applies for you, doesn't it? I think you've learned from your parents. I think the thing they got most upset with you about is that you weren't being honest with them.
Yeah.
And didn't you get out of doghouse more when you were honest with them?
I did. Honesty is a big factor in having a good relationship with your parents. Yeah, definitely.
And I think that helped you with them, right, over the years in terms of
Yeah.
working through this stuff. So what do you think about what Hailey's saying? I mean, you're in the schools. Do they lock the bathrooms? So kids, I even heard that locking the bathrooms, and you have to have a key.
They've done that, yeah. Every little while, you know, they'll bust like 4 kids doing it, and they'll just decide to lock it for a day. I mean, some of the strategies, I could say they're good. A lot of them are kind of, don't seem like they put too much effort into it. But, you know, Hailey's completely right. We just got to focus on education mixed with like being open about it. That's a very good way to put it.
Which goes back to my frustration with mental health. Not only can you not get into the emergency rooms or see a therapist, but there's not a lot going on in the schools. I remember when I first went into practice, I was giving talks in the schools, consulting with the schools. It doesn't seem to be much going on there. Am I right about that?
I think it depends on the school, because some schools do have, I'd say, pretty good, you know, a few counselors. My school in particular, I wouldn't say it's bad, but I have heard a lot of the student body complain about their counselors, because you get randomly assigned, and some people, you know, don't feel that their counselor meets their needs or relates to them in any way. So I think that it really depends on where you're located. And if we're talking about some of the districts that are funded less, that's where the problem really starts. Because, you know, I'm really lucky. I live in a very wealthy area, especially with the schooling system. But we have, you know, a few towns down, we have communities that are running on dust and don't even have, you know, good counselors or one counselor or any. And that's when it becomes a problem. Yeah.
Economics is certainly a factor, just like it was with COVID, right, Hailey? I mean, it depends on, you know, where you're living. I wanted to ask, how will the legalization of weed affect the current drug culture?
Would you like me to go, Hailey? I don't want to cut you off.
You both. We want to hear from. We want both of you. Great. So let's hear from both of you.
I think it will have pros and cons. I think it's great because it's going to raise a lot of money, and it's doing that in a somewhat, you know, healthy way. I would personally say, like, I think weed is safer than something like alcohol. So it will become more accepted. It may reduce, you know, the amount of alcohol we see. I think it definitely will, because there are a lot of people that are okay with weed but don't necessarily smoke it because it's illegal. And I want it to become more accepted within our infrastructure, because I think it will create like a, you know, a better environment for everybody. As for teenagers, I think it goes both ways. There were studies that showed that when something was legalized, the usage went down, and there were studies that showed when something was legalized, it went up. So I think it depends on where you are and what your state's doing, how accessible it is. It even depends on things so specific as the prices, you know, everything.
Right. And Hailey, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I agree. I think Leighton said it fantastically. And I'm curious. I mean, we'll see. What I do know is that anytime you take the taboo and the punishment and the control and all of that kind of tightness around anything, things become more free underneath. So I'm curious if it'll be less appealing, or if there'll be less shame and anxiety in talking about it and being honest about it if it's more accepted culturally.
We have the other problem now with COVID, right? Because COVID now, they're saying actually that it's gotten worse. The drug culture has gotten worse because kids have been isolated. They're really depressed. They have anxiety. And so now we're dealing with terrible mental health issues in this country with the youth. And I'm, again, under 13. We're not just talking about over 13. We're talking about under 13. So how does all of this, alcohol, cannabis, everything now going to play into this is a pretty scary thing. And how about like getting behind a wheel? I mean, alcohol, people get behind a wheel and we worry. Now we're going to have 21-year-olds getting behind a wheel and it's cool. And we have to worry about that now too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot yeah.
You can go.
Yeah, I just ultimately, I just think it's important to talk to kids about their feelings. Like if we can really normalize these conversations at the root and normalize uncomfortable feelings, challenging feelings that, you know, are less commonly talked about and less commonly accepted, we'll see less numbing out and reaching for ways to distract if we actually just accept them.
I was actually, hey, I'll just interject here from backstage. Mike. I was actually reading an article today about the, you know, with the new legalization in Connecticut, that they released a whole new set of regulations for the troopers on what they can do. You know, smelling pot no longer is reason to search a vehicle, and how do you conduct a field sobriety test you can't, you can blow a breathalyzer test with alcohol, but for weed, you can't do that. I mean, they can do, the touch your nose, and if you can, the reactive type tests, but a lot of that is really hard to do. And I think they're still figuring it all out right now.
Can it be stopped or fixed? Can we stop or fix this problem, Leighton?
I mean, it can be helped. I don't think it can be completely stopped or completely fixed, especially when there's people already doing it. And as we've seen forever, drugs never really go away. They're always part of society in some way or another. But I think, as Hailey's talking about, making it more acceptable is going to be a big part of it, because, repeating what she said, kids will feel less pressure and be more open about it.
So you have a girlfriend now, I understand, Leighton. Am I right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I heard the rumor has it you've really met a really nice girl. I'm really happy for you.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
It's very exciting, and hope to meet her someday. And I know you guys like to have fun together and do a little vaping together, and you still have your joyride together. So how are you two, as boyfriend and girlfriend, in this era dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Vaping, I've been on and off with it for a while, because nicotine, they started marketing to, younger kids back when I was in like 8th grade. So it's been around me for a while. I've used it for a while on and off. And, I'm definitely about to spoil some kids' days, but what a lot of parents don't know, but mine did, was you can test your child for nicotine. You can make them pee in a cup and test it for nicotine. And, a lot of kids come home, like maybe they smell a fruity flavor on their kid's breath. Maybe they don't. Have you been vaping? No. Okay. They might not find things. They might find things. But what happened with my parents is they decided to test me for it, and if I wasn't clean, I would be punished. And, it has its benefits. It has its cons. I think with an addictive substance like nicotine, almost one of the only ways to deal with it is kind of that. If your child isn't, necessarily going to be completely honest and say, like, yes, I vaped today. No, I didn't. But I think, parents also have to be careful with that, because it can create like a bad relationship, because it's an addictive substance. It's really, really hard for a developing child to quit, especially when they've started and it's all around them. You talked about my girlfriend. Some people have friend groups. When you have a friend group we're talking about nicotine, vaping a lot, and you're trying to quit, the chemical basically reprograms your brain. So you're standing in a circle with your friends, or I'm with my girlfriend, I see her vaping. It's really, really, really hard not to just say, okay, it's fine. I'm just going to take a little bit. Like, it's fine. I won't do it tomorrow. Right. But, and as Hailey talked about it, that's where this whole, awakening, being connected with yourself and having these conversations comes in, because, it's not something that you can have someone do for you. You need to quit yourself. And that's a big factor that I think is important, and parents need to realize you can't force your child to quit something, right? You have to help them with that journey themselves.
So you've come a long way, Leighton, you and your girlfriend helping each other get through this together?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard, but when you have someone else backing you up, and if you're trying to quit together and you have a friend or, a significant other that is doing and going through the same struggle as you, it's good, you check in on them, you check up with them, like, are you done? No, and it kind of creates like a fun, and that's one of my tips for if you're trying to quit.
So Hailey, what do you think? Love, romance, connection, best friend, relationship, having that one person who can accept you and really hear you. What do you think about what Leighton's saying?
Connection is so important. It's so important. I mean, even just having someone that you can talk to and realize, like, oh, you feel this thing too. You feel this uncomfortable thing too. This thing I was trying to go to substances to avoid. I mean, I think connection is medicine, truly.
Well, and Leighton, you're doing a lot of great things in your life now. You've come along. I want to know how you've evolved to get to where you are, and maybe you can share with the people some of the cool things you're doing now, because you've come a long way, Leighton.
Thank you. So back, I can kind of start with like a little story. So in 9th and 10th grade, I wasn't, the most studious student. I didn't put that much effort into my work. It was kind of just like a side job. I was focusing on other things, some of that being substances, my friends, but school, and that's the reality for a lot of freshmen. School is not the priority, right? you're not really in the real world yet. So it's hard to accept, I got to put my effort into this because it's going to be important later on. And I did at that time have a little charity I created called The Future of Your Future. Our mission was to help foster children because, they don't have a lot of resources and they're not, the government doesn't have enough funding to, send them to camp, buy them that musical instrument, give them lessons, therapy, anything like that. So that was the mission. And, I did raise some money, but again, I wasn't fully there. I wasn't fully caring, or not really, that's not the word, but putting enough effort or doing the best I could. And then later, towards the end of sophomore year, I kind of came to a realization, multiple reasons why. I learned something in school that I related to, a theory by a philosopher, John Rawls. Maybe talk about it later. It's long, but I began to apply myself, and I kind of began to find myself, and I kind of stepped away from substances, especially weed, because, weed does demotivate you, and that's a whole nother thing, but it really does cause demotivation, and that's a scary thing that they don't really teach you in school. You have to, and it's hard to learn about too, because you smoke weed, I'm fine, I'm not demotivated, what are you talking about? Like, I'm doing great. But then you get off and you step back and you realize, wait, I wasn't really doing anything. So I began to put effort into my charity, and now we've raised about $4,000 with a fundraiser called Cans for Kids. And I came up with this during COVID. I was thinking, how can I revitalize my charity? What can I do? Something sustainable, something good, helpful, raising money. So I take recyclables, cans and bottles, 5 cents. Now people drop them off and I pick them up. I have volunteers picking them up. I used to sort them by hand, by myself, or with friends. Now I have other people sorting them for me because there's a lot. But we then bring that to the Mass Recycling Center up in Stratford, Connecticut. Or not Connecticut, Stratford though. And then we take that money and then donate it to different programs like animal therapy. We got gift cards for low-income foster families. This time we're sending 2 kids to camp. So that's the main thing I've been doing right now.
Hailey, what do you think of this kid?
Oh my God, amazing.
Finding his passions, right?
So cool. I'm so impressed. I mean, that sounds amazing. And then, what I'm thinking while you're speaking is like, in this conversation, purpose and meaning and like being of service is such a fantastic place to put your energy, and like truly like using your position in the world and your energy to make the world a better place. And that's beautiful.
He's validating a lot of things you've been talking about tonight. What's this philosopher you were talking about, Leighton? I know we're not going to do a whole thing on this philosopher.
Yeah, I can just give it. So John Rawls, he was a philosopher we learned about. I was very into debate, so I took debate class. And
you were on the debating team too. That's another thing you did. You found another purpose. Yeah.
And that kind of converted into law. Now I'm interested in that. But we learned about John Rawls and something called the veil of ignorance. And it's very complicated, and I'm probably going to butcher it. But it's basically saying before you're about to make a decision, especially it's for like policy, it was kind of more of like a something to look at when you're fortunate. How would you make this decision if you could be born or come into life and just be anybody of any sex, any gender, any race, any sexuality? How would you make that choice? What would you do? How does it affect everybody? And it's good for looking at the whole picture. And that kind of led me to realize that, I drew really good cards from the deck. I live in Reading, Connecticut, supportive family and such. So I wanted to use, those good cards to help those people who drew worse cards from the deck.
So Hailey, what do you think about that, huh?
So it's just so good. Yeah.
So good, right?
And I'm so impressed. Like, I'm so impressed with kids today. And I'm a little older. I'm 26. I have a degree in sociology and gender studies. I took my own theories and theories of justice courses. And so when you're saying the names, I'm like, I remember that guy. Yeah. And I'm so impressed because like even people just a few years younger than me are getting this education younger and younger and like working it into yourself and your system and your education as you're moving through the world as a young person. It's just so fantastic.
So kids are talking.
They are talking.
That is what this show is about, and you are doing it. And I have another question. 16-year-old, he's got a 20-year-old, 21-year-old brother or sister, whatever, who now the brother sister can smoke pot. Isn't the 16-year-old now more apt to like say, I want to do that too? Do you think that's going to be a change now between if you have a sibling or someone younger and they see that their hero is 21 and being able to do whatever they want to do. What do you think about that, both of you?
I think that was already true, whether it was legalized or not. And I think
you don't think it makes a difference?
Yeah.
You don't think it makes a difference?
I don't know, but I don't think so.
Leighton, do you think it makes a difference?
I was gonna say basically the same thing, and also, it's kind of the same thing with alcohol. I don't think, even if that child hasn't been exposed to weed in particular, if that brother is going to go smoke weed, I'm sure they've also seen them with like a solo cup in their hand or a beer and such. So I think it's nothing too different. Again, we need to make sure that education is there, so it's not something completely new and they don't know what it is. You know what I mean? So they have a background on it. But as Hailey said, I don't think it's too different because, brothers and sisters, they're doing that anyway.
What do you think about parents getting high with their kids? Because that is going on.
I think that's a great thing to bring up. We actually discussed that in my family, just because my mom is kind of against that, though my dad is more for it. And it's funny because my mom likes to drink wine at the dinner table sometimes, rarely, but she does. Mm-hmm. And we always say, how is it different in any way, right? And I honestly think that that's perfectly fine. Obviously not 24/7, not, to the same extent you would be sipping a beer or, some other drink around your children. To that sense, I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all.
So it's a matter of degree. What do you think, Hailey?
I think parents just need to be thinking about what they want their kids to know and what they're teaching their kids through their actions. Are you trying to be a cool parent, or is this actually something that you want to teach your child? And that's a personal decision.
I'll tell you, I know a parent who many years ago was trying to at least relate to the kid to understand what is this. So they took a joint and they took a little puff of it. And I think in that way, maybe it made it feel safer. At least the parent was trying to understand. And at least I guess it's a matter of degree. Maybe it's not something you do all the time. But in that case, the father tried it once with his daughter and seemed to be okay. Because it showed that he didn't want his daughter to be secretive about it and wanted to understand what the experience of that was. Makes sense?
Beautiful.
It does make sense. So I think we've already answered this question, but how do kids stay sane in this post-COVID world or this no man's land that we're living in now with everything going on, all these choices, all these confusions? What's the best thing to say about how we can stay sane right now? What do you think?
I mean, I would say number one, be of service. And Leighton did a great job modeling that. Because really what's happening is that we have all of this extra energy. And so it's if we don't put our energy somewhere, we still have this energy. What happens is that it stays inside of us and it implodes. So how can you be of service, number one? And then number two, and I've talked about this a few times, it's there's nothing wrong with you. We all have feelings that are uncomfortable, that are demonized by the culture. It is so easy to not feel happy all the time and to think that something must be horribly wrong. And it's actually humans are cyclic beings. We have ups, we have downs, we're out, and then we're in. Yes. And it's actually okay. So really learning how to be with yourself is a wonderful part. It's really, I've looked at all of this as an opportunity. I've gone really inwards. I didn't know I'm introverted. I had no idea that I was introverted before really going all the way in with myself during this pandemic. And so if you want it, it is an opportunity.
Take the inside ride. That's what I always say. And what about that, Leighton? I think vulnerability, people have trouble thinking that we have to be perfect, that we can't, particularly guys, you can't talk about your feelings, you can't hug, you can't cry.
That's another good point. Especially at school, we talk about cliques and stuff like that, groups. It's hard. It's really hard, especially with conformity. I was always one of the people who tried not to conform. I didn't like that idea. You walk into high school and you see the group of guys wearing the same, making jokes, making fun of other people, to get a laugh, that whole thing. And, a lot of that is done because they're not okay with themselves. People aren't, as Hailey's talking about, fully connected with their inner being. So I think that, again, it's just all about support structures and really trying to make sure children understand, as Hailey said, it's okay to be upset, because as you talked about, guys, especially, that they have trouble expressing their feelings because in our culture, it's considered not manly. And, what's good, though, is we are becoming more progressive. I'm sure you've noticed, but, that message and messages like that, other, gender norms, gender roles, they're beginning to be reduced. So I think,
Yes.
you know, COVID kind of also may have sped up that process, I think, a little bit. There were a lot of things that were coming to light over social media and being talked about more because everybody's sitting inside. You know, the discussion went online. A lot of people put more energy into social movements and such. So I think we're really at a turning point in history for everything.
Yeah, look at Black Lives Matter.
Exactly,
look at the Pride Month. Look at our show last week. Look at how people are starting to talk about body image. And now we'll swing back to you, Hailey, with your whole spiritual thing, which is one of my favorite subjects. There's a man named Michael Pollan who wrote a book, How to Change Your Mind. Are you familiar with that book?
No, I'm not.
So this is really ties into where you were talking earlier about spirituality and creativity. You know, in the 60s out in California, Big Sur, psychedelics were big, LSD was big, and the research psychiatrists, some of the radical, more out-of-the-box psychiatrists, Jungian therapists, Timothy Leary, were experimenting with LSD, hallucinogenics, and it was actually not really accepted, so it was getting a lot of flack and controversy, but they were really believing that it helped people explore their inner ride and their inner selves and try to work with psychedelics to actually help people that are depressed and anxious and are really struggling with their inner demons. Now, Michael Pollan has this new book out. And if you look at Native American Indian culture, you look at primitive cultures in general with mushrooms and psilocybin, which is what people are doing. I mean, I was at a party recently with some very successful, very good functional kids. I call them kids even if they're in their 40s. And they were talking about, right, Mike, that's a little controversial on our show, but I believe we're all kids.
I'm still a kid.
Well, yeah, we're all inner children, right? So I think that Michael Pollan has this great book about, you know, imagination and what they're doing with spiritual meaning. And it's being more accepted now to work with people that are schizophrenic and are anxious and depressed. And it's becoming a more acceptable thing now in the medical community. So it's interesting, Hailey, when you were talking about that. So I'm interested to hear what the two of you think about that.
I think a lot of people in the spiritual community, people who want to learn more about themselves, do turn toward different kinds of drugs in order to have spiritual experiences. I think that it's one way to do it. I don't think it's the only way to do it. Personally, I don't do it that way. I also think that just because you can do it doesn't mean that it's always done in a way that is clean and true. So there's the
studies are being controlled now, by the way. They're doing this, they're controlled. But anyway,
so
I'm sorry.
I don't know a lot about that, about mental health and how they're doing this in studies. But what I will say is that we have a whole spiritual world that's living inside of our bodies. So for the people who are wanting to experiment with drugs in order to access some level of spirituality, you can do it, and you absolutely don't have to.
Well, I guess what we're really talking about, Leighton, what do you think about that study and what Michael Pollan's talking about? And, and the thing about self-discovery is so big now and expanding your universe and meaning in life. What would you have to say about that?
Yeah, so I was pretty interested in, the psychedelic drugs. I think sophomore year or something, I wrote a paper on them, I believe, like one of those research papers. And there were a bunch of studies done with LSD. I know what you're talking about. And a lot of them showed that microdosing on LSD, which means taking like a very small amount, one that's not necessarily noticeable, like you're not noticeably, I guess the word is tripping on LSD. It's just something that's subliminal. They tested it on a lot of depressed people and anxious individuals and found that it had really positive side effects. But as you know, Hailey's talking about, it's not always a good idea to turn to chemicals. It's also important to try and do that yourself the hard way. But that will probably create a stronger connection, with your inner being than turning to a substance.
You think, Hailey, it's a dangerous path to encourage people to be doing that?
I just think it's a personal choice, and everyone has a different path. And sometimes the path is to try something and be like, that's not for me, or to try something and be like, oh, that is for me, but in this way. And again, I was talking about making choices and having the self-awareness of why am I making the choices that I'm making.
It's interesting that Leighton said that about the microdosing, because with the dispensaries now, they actually have microdosing for cannabis too. You can get like just a milligram or two, and it's been helping people deal with anxiety, deal with pain, and they're not necessarily high, but it just gives them that little bit of a boost to help them, take care of what they need to take care of.
But there is. I talked about Carl Jung last week. I didn't get too far with Carl Jung. He talks about the collective unconscious. That's a whole separate show.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, good old. You know about Dr. Jung and his interest in deep archetypal worlds and imagination. And what do
We
you know
learned a lot
that?
about him in psychology.
So it's just a matter of like people want to dig deep and get meaning, and if you can find ways to do it in a safe way, that's what's really important here. My final question of the night. And actually, Leighton, it was you who gave me this question. I want to acknowledge you for some really good questions that you gave me before the show. If you could tell a younger teenager one thing, what would it be?
And this goes with the theme of the show. I think it's really important. Don't use nicotine. It's like, I mean, there are so many things you could be doing, even other substances. And I'm not talking about like hard drugs, obviously, but nicotine should be the last thing you look at and say, hey, I want to try that. And I'm talking about, like we're talking about weed, alcohol. You don't want to use nicotine because it's addictive. It creates a cycle that is really, really hard to tear you away from. It literally makes your brain release dopamine, which is the happy chemical, serotonin and such. And it creates a cycle where you're literally going to start tricking yourself into keeping doing it, and you're going to be okay with that because your brain does it. It's not you don't make a decision, it happens automatically, and that's what happens with addictive substances. So definitely do not look towards nicotine. Your friends are doing it, it's not worth it. I promise you. You'll end up wasting money, time, health. You're just wasting your life on something that has absolutely no benefit.
Leighton, as a guy, I smoked for 10 years. I quit smoking over 10 years ago now, but I smoked when I was in high school, and that's the best. I agree that it was just it's a waste of money, a waste of time, and the only thing it does is make you want it to do it more, which is pretty pointless.
Thanks, Leighton. That's you're really quite proud of how you've evolved to be quite the young man. What a gift you are for everybody watching the show. And Hailey, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would second that. And then just to add on, you can trust yourself is the message that I would give to young people. You can trust that inner voice, and that, we have all of these forces in our world trying to sway us from that place, what we should do, what we think we should do, what other people want us to do. And it's like, you can actually trust your intuition and what the deepest thing in your body says is right for you. And it might be different than what would be easy or convenient to be right for you, right? But you can actually trust yourself.
And have confidence, right?
Right.
Believe in yourself.
And it takes some practice to be like, you know what? I'm going to experiment with listening to this voice that I don't understand and see what happens.
You two are a pretty good couple and team tonight. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think of the two of you? You think you did all right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
we didn't fill any other. I have to tell you, you were great. And we had this other kid that didn't come on, but having the two of you tonight, we've never just had two guests. And I tell you, I could just be here for another 2.5 hours listening to what you all have to say. So I want to thank.
We're gonna have to save that for another show, Don.
We're gonna have.
We only have an hour.
Yeah, Mike says we always have trouble saying goodbye, but I want to thank Leighton Schur, Hailey Marino for coming on Kids Are Talking. An amazing discussion, and wow, I hope everybody got to listen to this tonight and learn from the both of you, because you balanced each other and respected and listened to each other, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes,
great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you.
So yeah, we're going to put you guys backstage. If you just want to hang out for a couple of minutes, we'll catch up after the show.
Yeah, we want to celebrate the two of you.
And thanks again.
Thank you. Well,
Thanks for having me.
Mike,
I don't have a lot to say.
I think we covered everything that we needed to cover. I just feel bad that there were so many voices that weren't heard because of the legality and because of privacy issues. I mean, maybe we need to come up with some sort of blurred face type thing so we can get kids to come talk anonymously, because I think that would be the only way we could to really get into the issues that people have problems with.
No, don't be too discouraged, because we had kids like Leighton on and Hailey on, and we showed that basically we can merge a young generation of young adulthood with teenage adulthood. And basically, I do believe we're all kids inside. And it is true. That's why Kids Are Talking. There are not a lot of shows historically that have been done because it's so hard ethically and legally and all that other stuff. And I don't think we should give up on it, but it is tough to do a show like this. But we're going to keep going because it's calling. And these two tonight just show once again, and the last few shows we've had reinforces the importance of what we're doing here. So from all of us, our kids are talking. I want to wish you the best. A happy July 4th. Honor the freedom and liberation of a much more open society that now you can smoke pot and have to not hide it. And maybe your parents will let you get vaccinated if you're if they're open to realizing how many lives that could save. So good night, Mike.
Yeah, and anyone that's watching, parents or kids, if you want to come on the show, come to our website, kidsaretalking.live, or just send us a note through whatever social media you're watching us on right now. And we'd love to have you on the show. So I think that's it. And thanks again for watching, and have a great evening, everybody.
See you next week.